The soft hum of the church organ echoed through the nearly empty hall, blending with the distant whisper of rain tapping against stained glass windows. Candles flickered along the altar, their golden glow dancing across the polished wood. Lydia sat alone in the back pew, her fingers trembling as she unfolded a worn church bulletin. Her eyes were tired, not from lack of sleep, but from the ache of a heart that had forgotten how to hope. 2 months ago, she was supposed to be planning her wedding. 2 months ago, her future seemed certain: love, laughter, forever. But forever had ended with one message. I just need space, Lydia. I think we rush things. And that space had turned into silence. She hadn't meant to come to church that morning. She had driven aimlessly through the rain, trying to outrun her thoughts. Then, as if guided by something unseen, she found herself here, inside St. Michael's Church, a place she hadn't visited in years. The pews were half empty, but the atmosphere felt alive, filled with quiet prayers, soft sniffles, and the sound of hearts trying to heal. Then, the pastor stepped onto the platform. Reverend Collins wasn't young, but his eyes carried the spark of someone who had seen both the worst and best of life. His voice was calm, steady, like the sea after a storm. Sometimes, he began, God removes what we thought was meant for us, not to punish us, but to prepare us. The words fell over Lydia like warm rain. She froze, the paper in her hand crumpling. For the first time in weeks, she listened, really listened. Pain, the pastor continued, is not the end of your story. It's often the chapter where God begins writing again. Lydia's vision blurred. Her throat tightened. She tried to hold back the tears, but they came anyway, slow, silent, unstoppable. She didn't even realize the service had ended until the last hymn faded. People began to leave, their voices echoing softly. Lydia stayed seated, staring at the cross above the altar. That's when she heard footsteps approaching. Are you all right? Lydia turned. Reverend Collins stood beside her, his expression gentle but searching. She tried to smile, but it came out broken. I'm fine. Just a little lost, I guess. He nodded slowly, then sat beside her, something most pastors didn't usually do. You look like someone who's been carrying too much alone. His words struck something deep inside her. It's been a hard few weeks, she admitted. Everything I thought I wanted just fell apart. Reverend Collins looked at her quietly. Sometimes, when we lose what we love, we also lose the noise that kept us from hearing God's whisper. She blinked, her eyes wet. And what if I don't hear anything? He smiled softly. Then stay still long enough. The silence itself might be the beginning of your healing. They sat there for a few minutes, no words, just the sound of rain outside. It wasn't awkward. It was peaceful, like the world had slowed down just for them. When Lydia finally stood, the pastor handed her a small card. There's a young adults group on Thursday evenings. Good people. You don't have to talk, just come. She hesitated. I don't know if I'm ready for people. Sometimes, he said kindly, healing begins the moment we stop waiting to be ready. That week, the thought of going to church again tugged at Lydia's mind like a gentle voice she couldn't ignore. Thursday came, and after 20 minutes of convincing herself not to go, she found herself outside the same church once more. The room was bright, filled with chatter and laughter. A dozen or so people sat in a circle, coffee cups in hand. She recognized none of them, except Reverend Collins, who smiled from across the room. He introduced her warmly, and one of the members, a tall, soft-spoken man with kind eyes, offered her a seat. Hi, I'm Daniel, he said, extending his hand. Lydia, she replied quietly. Daniel smiled. Glad you came. The session began. They talked about hope, trust, and how to rebuild when life breaks you. Lydia mostly listened, but something about their honesty touched her. These weren't perfect people. They were hurting, healing, laughing, just like her. After the session, Daniel caught up to her as she walked to her car. The night was cool, stars shimmering above the wet pavement. Hey, he said, thanks for sharing, even just a little. She laughed softly. I didn't really say much. He smiled. You didn't have to. Sometimes showing up is enough. Lydia paused, looking at him. There was something genuine about him. No pity, no judgment. Just understanding. As she drove home, she realized something had shifted. The pain was still there, yes, but for the first time in months, she felt lighter. Sunday came again. The church was brighter this time, sunlight pouring through the stained glass like pieces of heaven. Lydia sat closer to the front, her heart steady. When the music began, she closed her eyes. The song wasn't about heartbreak or loss, it was about grace. And in that moment, she finally let herself breathe. After the service, Reverend Collins found her near the steps. "Good to see you again, Lydia." "I think I needed to be here," she said honestly. He nodded. "You see, healing doesn't always happen in miracles. Sometimes it happens in moments, one quiet prayer, one kind word, one step of courage." She smiled faintly. "I think I took my first step." "Then keep walking," he said. "You never know where it might lead." As Lydia walked out of the church that day, the sunlight hit her face, warm and gentle. She didn't know it yet, but the path she was stepping onto, one guided by faith and kindness, would lead her somewhere she never expected. Somewhere love was waiting, quietly, patiently, just around the corner. And it had all begun with a pastor's simple words. The sun dipped low behind the church steeple, painting the evening sky in gold and crimson. Lydia stood by the fellowship hall window, watching the last streaks of light fade into twilight. The churchyard was buzzing with laughter and chatter. The Thursday group had just ended, and people lingered to talk, share snacks, and tease each other about their week. She should have felt out of place, but she didn't. For the first time in months, she wasn't invisible. Daniel approached with 2 paper cups of coffee in his hands. "You look like you could use something warm," he said, offering one with a half-smile. Lydia accepted it, her fingers brushing against his for a fleeting second. "Thanks. I didn't realize talking about forgiveness could feel this exhausting." He chuckled softly. "That's because forgiveness isn't easy. Especially when you're trying to forgive yourself." She looked up sharply. "What makes you think I'm the one who needs forgiving?" Daniel smiled knowingly. "You've got that look, like someone who blames herself for things that weren't her fault." Lydia stared at her cup, silent. The aroma of coffee mingled with the faint scent of candles and rain-soaked earth outside. After a pause, she whispered, "He said I wasn't enough. That he needed space to find what he really wanted." Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. "I tried so hard to be what he needed, and still it wasn't enough." Daniel's voice was low and calm. "Sometimes people leave not because we lack something, but because they were never ready to receive what we were offering." Lydia's eyes met his, and for a moment, she couldn't look away. There was no pity in his expression, only understanding, quiet and real. Over the next few weeks, she found herself looking forward to Thursdays. Each session felt like a small step toward healing. They read verses, shared stories, and laughed at awkward jokes Reverend Collins made to lighten the mood. But what Lydia treasured most were the quiet moments after, when the hall emptied and she and Daniel stayed behind to stack chairs or clean up. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't need to. One evening, as they packed up hymn books, Lydia noticed a small scar on Daniel's wrist. "What happened there?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "A reminder from another life. I used to be a firefighter." Her eyebrows lifted. "Used to be?" He nodded, gaze distant. "Lost a teammate in a rescue 3 years ago. I blamed myself for a long time. The guilt, it nearly broke me. But Reverend Collins helped me find my way back. Helped me remember that sometimes faith is just choosing to keep breathing." Lydia's heart softened. He has a way of saying things that stay with you. Daniel's lips curved. "He does. Like when he told me, you don't need to be whole to be loved. You just need to be honest." That line hit her harder than she expected. For a long time, she'd worn her heartbreak like armor, afraid to admit how deeply it had cut her. But in that moment, she realized honesty wasn't weakness. It was healing. One Sunday morning, the church was fuller than usual. The choir sang with fire, and the congregation swayed to the rhythm of faith and joy. Lydia found herself smiling during hymns she hadn't sung since childhood. After the service, she helped set up tables for the charity bake sale. Daniel was already there, sleeves rolled up, arranging boxes of pastries. "Careful," she teased. "Those cupcakes look too perfect. People might think you bought them." Daniel laughed. "That's because I did." They shared a warm, easy laugh, the kind that came naturally now. Reverend Collins passed by, watching them with a knowing glimmer in his eyes. "Looks like teamwork suits you too," he said, adjusting his glasses. Lydia blushed. "We're just helping, Pastor." "Of course," he said, smiling. "But sometimes help comes wrapped in unexpected blessings." He walked away before either of them could respond, leaving Lydia flustered and Daniel grinning. That night, rain poured again, the kind that made the world sound quieter. Lydia sat by her window, watching droplets race down the glass. Her phone buzzed. A message. "Daniel, are you listening to the rain too?" "Lydia, I am. It's peaceful tonight." "Daniel, funny. I used to hate rain. Reminded me of loss. But now it feels like renewal." She hesitated, then typed back. "Lydia, maybe that's what healing is, learning to see beauty in what once broke you." A moment later, 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then came his reply. "Daniel, you're not just healing, Lydia. You're blooming." Her chest tightened, and for the first time in a long while, she smiled at a message that made her heart skip instead of ache. Days turned into weeks. Seasons began to shift. Lydia joined more church events, youth outreach, soup kitchens, food drives. She wasn't just attending anymore, she was part of something again. And Daniel was always there, carrying boxes, laughing with volunteers, driving her home when it got late. They'd talk about everything and nothing, childhood dreams, mistakes, faith, even the fear of falling again. One evening, after a long day of community work, they sat on the church steps watching the sunset. The world was quiet, painted in amber and pink. Daniel spoke softly. "You ever think maybe we go through heartbreak just to learn what real love feels like when it finally comes?" Lydia turned to him, her eyes catching the fading light. "Maybe. Or maybe heartbreak just makes us appreciate the gentle ones, the people who show up when everyone else leaves." Their eyes lingered, the air between them heavy with something unspoken, yet deeply understood. Just then, the church doors creaked open behind them. Reverend Collins stepped out, his warm smile breaking the tension. "Ah, the 2 hardest workers in my ministry. Taking a well-deserved break, I see." Lydia laughed, standing up quickly. "Just admiring the sunset, Pastor." He nodded, then looked between them with a hint of amusement. "Sunsets are a sign of endings, but also of beginnings. Don't miss what God might be writing right in front of you." He walked away, leaving Lydia and Daniel speechless. Later that night, lying in bed, Lydia thought about his words. Beginnings. Had she really moved on? Or was she just afraid to name what she was feeling? Her mind drifted back to Daniel's laughter, his quiet strength, the way he listened without trying to fix her pain. It wasn't the dizzy kind of love she'd once chased. It was gentler, deeper. Something that felt like home. For the first time since her heartbreak, Lydia whispered a prayer, not asking for the past to return, but for courage to embrace whatever was coming next. As she drifted to sleep, the words of Pastor Collins echoed softly in her mind. When you stop asking why it ended and start asking what it began, that's when healing turns into purpose. And somewhere in her heart, Lydia knew her story wasn't over. It was just beginning to bloom. The sound of laughter echoed through the church hall as boxes shuffled, tables creaked, and volunteers bustled about. Lydia stood near the doorway, clipboard in hand, watching the swirl of activity. It was Saturday, the day of the annual community outreach drive, and the air buzzed with energy. Children ran around with balloons, elders exchanged warm smiles, and Reverend Collins moved from one corner to another, thanking everyone for their help. Lydia caught sight of Daniel across the room, lifting a heavy crate of canned food with effortless ease. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong arms dusted with flour from the morning bake sale. He looked tired but happy, the kind of happy that came from doing something that mattered. "Hey, Lydia," he called, waving. "Need a hand?" She laughed softly. "You've already got your hands full." "Still got one free," he teased, balancing the box with one arm. Their banter came easily now, warm, familiar, threaded with a rhythm that felt natural. She walked over to help him unpack the box, their fingers brushing briefly as they sorted supplies. The moment was small, but it lingered, like a note in a melody that refused to fade. Later that day, dark clouds began to gather over the town. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain. Inside, Lydia helped tidy up after the drive. The church floor gleamed, the scent of lemon cleaner mixing with candle wax. She was reaching for a box on the top shelf when her foot slipped on the polished tiles. Before she could hit the ground, Daniel's arms wrapped around her, steady and sure. For a second, everything stilled. The world outside could have disappeared, and she wouldn't have noticed. Their eyes met, hers wide with surprise, his filled with concern. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, but her voice came out as a whisper. "Yeah, just clumsy." He didn't let go immediately, and she didn't step away. For that heartbeat of time, it felt like the entire church held its breath. When she finally pulled back, her cheeks flushed. "Thank you for catching me." Daniel smiled faintly. "Always." That night, Lydia sat in her car outside the church long after everyone had left. Rain poured down in sheets, blurring the world into streaks of silver. She gripped the steering wheel, her heart racing for reasons she couldn't explain, or maybe didn't want to. She had promised herself she wouldn't fall again. That love wasn't worth the pain. But now, the quiet warmth she felt every time Daniel smiled or said her name, it was starting to scare her. "God," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm not ready for this. Not again." But somewhere deep inside, she knew the truth. Love doesn't wait for readiness. It simply arrives, quietly, faithfully, like sunrise after storm. Sunday morning came, and Lydia walked into church early, hoping the calm before service would clear her thoughts. Reverend Collins was already there, adjusting hymn sheets on the pulpit. He looked up when he saw her and smiled. "You've been working hard lately," he said gently. "You and Daniel make quite the team." Lydia hesitated. "He's kind, easy to talk to." "Ah," the pastor said knowingly, his smile deepening. "And does that scare you?" She looked down. "A little. Maybe more than a little." He set the hymn sheets aside and leaned on the pulpit. "Lydia, healing doesn't mean your heart will never tremble again. It means you've learned what makes it worth trembling for." She frowned slightly. "But what if I get hurt again?" He nodded thoughtfully. "You might. That's the risk of loving. But tell me, isn't a guarded heart also a lonely one?" Her eyes glistened. "You make it sound so simple." He chuckled softly. "Simple, yes. Easy, never. But remember this, God doesn't just restore what's broken. Sometimes He replaces it with something better." His words lingered in her heart long after she left the sanctuary. Weeks passed, and with them came a quiet shift. Lydia noticed it in the way she smiled more easily, laughed more often, prayed more sincerely. And Daniel, he was always there, not demanding her attention but earning it through small, thoughtful gestures. He'd bring her coffee when she forgot breakfast, remind her to rest when she overworked, and listen when she spoke about her fears. One evening, after another long day at the shelter, Daniel walked her to her car. The sky was painted with streaks of violet and silver, stars peeking through. "You ever wonder why some people are sent into our lives?" he asked. She tilted her head. "You mean like fate?" He smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe it's grace, the kind that shows up when you least deserve it." She studied him for a long moment. "And which one are you?" Daniel's eyes softened. "I'm just someone who believes that God doesn't waste heartbreak. He uses it to build something stronger." Her breath caught. The sincerity in his tone, the quiet strength, it stirred something in her she hadn't felt in a long time. That night, as Lydia lay in bed, her thoughts wouldn't rest. Every conversation, every smile, every touch replayed in her mind like scenes from a story still unfolding. She picked up her journal, something Reverend Collins had encouraged her to start. On the first page she wrote, "I thought I came to church to find peace. But maybe I came to find purpose." She paused, pen hovering over the page, then added softly, "And maybe, just maybe, a love." The next morning, she arrived early for the Sunday service. The church was still, golden light spilling through stained glass, painting the pews in shades of ruby and sapphire. Daniel was already there, tuning the guitar for worship. When he looked up and saw her, his face lit up in a way that made her chest tighten. "Morning," he said, voice soft. "Morning," she replied, unable to hide her smile. For a while, they just stood there, two souls caught between the past and something new. Then, the doors opened and the sanctuary filled with voices, breaking the spell. During the service, Reverend Collins spoke about love, not the kind sung about in songs, but the kind that endures storms. "Love," he said, "isn't found in perfection. It's found in grace, the grace to forgive, to believe, to try again." His gaze swept across the congregation, pausing briefly on Lydia and Daniel. "And sometimes," he continued, "God answers our prayers not with thunder, but with a whisper, through someone who simply stays." Lydia's heart swelled. She looked at Daniel, and he smiled, the kind of smile that said, "I understand." In that moment, something inside her shifted. The walls she had built began to crumble, replaced by a quiet peace she hadn't known she was missing. As the final hymn played, Lydia closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. Because love, real love, wasn't something she had to chase. It was something that found her when she finally stopped running. And though she didn't realize it yet, her story, the one that began with heartbreak, was about to bloom into something far more beautiful than she ever imagined. The first day of spring dawned soft and golden, sunlight spilling across the stained glass windows of St. Michael's Church. The air carried the scent of fresh lilies, a quiet promise of renewal. Lydia stood in the church garden, arranging flowers for the Easter service. Her hands moved gently, placing each bloom with care. It was strange, she thought, how the same hands that once trembled from heartbreak were now steady, sure, peaceful. "Those look beautiful," a familiar voice said behind her. She turned. Daniel stood there, holding a small basket of tulips. His shirt sleeves were rolled, his hair slightly tousled by the wind. There was something different in his eyes, a calm certainty, the kind that comes when someone knows where they belong. Lydia smiled. "You always manage to bring the prettiest ones." He shrugged, grinning. "I just go where the flowers are brightest. Guess that's why I ended up here." Her cheeks flushed at his words, but she didn't look away. There was no awkwardness now, no fear, just warmth, steady and quiet. Inside the church, preparations for the Easter service buzzed with life. Volunteers moved in cheerful rhythm, the choir practiced near the altar, and children ran around with palms and ribbons. Reverend Collins watched from a distance, his heart swelling with gratitude. He'd seen Lydia arrive months ago, broken, uncertain, lost. And now, he watched her laugh with Daniel, her joy effortless, her spirit whole again. God does work in mysterious ways, he murmured to himself. That afternoon, after the service, Lydia and Daniel helped pack leftover food for the shelter. The sunlight streamed through the high windows, turning dust motes into glitter. They worked side by side, moving quietly, comfortably, as if they had been doing this their whole lives. At one point, Lydia looked up and found him already watching her. "What?" she asked, trying not to blush. He smiled faintly. "Just thinking how far you've come." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I remember the first day you came here," he said softly. "You looked like someone who'd lost all her colors. Now," he gestured lightly, "now you're light itself." Lydia's heart thudded. "You make it sound poetic." "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it's just true." She looked away, her chest tightening with a feeling she no longer wanted to deny. A week later, the church organized a picnic in the meadow by the river, something Reverend Collins called a celebration of new beginnings. The day was perfect. Children chased butterflies, elders sang hymns under the trees, and the air was filled with laughter and the smell of fresh bread. Lydia wore a simple white dress that fluttered in the breeze, her laughter brighter than the afternoon sun. Daniel found her sitting under a willow tree, barefoot, toes brushing the grass. He sat beside her, handing her a cold lemonade. "Beautiful day," he said. "It really is," she whispered, watching the sunlight glint off the water. For a while, they sat in silence, just the hum of the river and the distant sound of singing. Then Daniel spoke again, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "Do you ever think about second chances?" She turned to him, curious. "All the time." He smiled slightly. "I used to think second chances were rare, that once something broke, it stayed broken. But then I met you." Her breath caught. "You reminded me," he continued, "that love doesn't always come when we expect it. Sometimes it comes when we're done looking, when we finally stop trying to fix what's gone and start noticing what's right in front of us." Lydia's eyes glistened. "Daniel." He reached out, taking her hand gently. "I don't want to rush you. I just want you to know, being near you feels like peace. And I haven't known peace in a long time." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the scent of wildflowers. Then Lydia whispered, "You make it sound so simple." He smiled softly. "Love doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to be honest." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky in gold and crimson, the churchyard glowed with lanterns. People laughed and sang, children danced barefoot, and the world felt drenched in grace. Reverend Collins gathered everyone around for a closing prayer. His voice carried gently through the warm air. "Tonight, we celebrate not just the season of renewal," he said, "but the reminder that love, true love, is a reflection of God's heart. It heals, it forgives, and it surprises us when we least expect it." As the crowd bowed their heads, Lydia glanced at Daniel beside her. Their hands brushed lightly, and this time, she didn't pull away. When the prayer ended, she turned to him, eyes shimmering with tears. "You know," she said softly, "when I first came here, I asked God why he took everything away from me." He looked at her gently. "And what did you hear?" She smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Nothing at first. But now I think he didn't take anything. He was making space for something better." Daniel squeezed her hand. "Then I'm glad you stayed long enough to see it." Months later, the church bells rang again, this time for a wedding. The garden bloomed with lilies and roses, the same ones Lydia had once arranged alone. The pews were filled with familiar faces, volunteers, friends, children from the shelter. Reverend Collins stood at the altar, his eyes shining. "Today," he began, "we celebrate a love born not out of perfection, but redemption. A love that grew from faith and friendship, the kind of love that restores what was once broken." Lydia stood in white, her eyes glowing as she walked down the aisle. Every step carried her past the tears, the heartbreak, the loneliness, and into something far brighter. Daniel waited at the altar, his smile steady, his eyes filled with awe. As they joined hands, Reverend Collins smiled. "It seems I've been witness to a small miracle," he said warmly. "One that reminds us that sometimes God answers prayers not with thunder, but with gentle whispers." Lydia glanced at the man who had unknowingly rewritten her story, not with grandeur, but with grace. She looked back at Daniel, and everything else faded. The music, the crowd, the years of pain. There was only this moment, and when they finally said, "I do," the sunlight broke through the clouds, bathing the church in a golden glow, as if heaven itself was smiling. Later, as they stood outside the church, newly married, Lydia turned to see Reverend Collins watching them from the doorway. She walked over and hugged him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. He chuckled softly. "For what?" "For reminding me that my story wasn't over." He smiled, his eyes warm with pride.
No, Lydia.
It was just waiting for the right chapter. As the sun set behind them, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, Lydia leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder. I used to think love had to be perfect, she said quietly. And now, he asked. She smiled. Now I know. It just has to be real. He kissed her forehead. Then I guess we're doing just fine. The church bells chimed once more, not as an ending, but as a beginning. And in that sacred moment, Lydia realized the greatest miracle wasn't that she had fallen in love again. It was that she had learned to believe in it.